Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Since we've got a small group, it'll be great to be able to address some specific questions that you have. There's a chat window in the upper right corner that if you have questions as I'm talking through the presentation, please just add them in here so I can make sure that we address them. And we'll hopefully have time for live dialogue questions at the end. So today we're going to talk about fundraising. Fundraising is an inevitable part of the life cycle of a nonprofit organization. Your entire ability to sustain and to continue delivering the mission programs you want is directly related to your ability to raise money to continue to pay for them. We'll talk sort of in general about fundraising strategies and kind of thinking through setting them up, and then we'll go through a few specific revenue streams and talk about some tips for things like grants and individual donations. And then, like I said, hopefully we'll have time at the end for some dialogue questions. My background, again, I think everyone here has been to another one of these weekly webinars, but my background is in executive director and finance director for nonprofit organizations. I've started a few arts-based organizations on the East Coast. Through my time there, I raised close to $1 million that we raised and gave out in the form of grants and sort of alternative placemaking funding. So I've been through this process of trying to raise money for a thing that nobody's heard of yet, that doesn't have a track record, that doesn't have, all the materials put together, and having to kind of figure that out and figure out what worked best for me. And I'll share a little bit at the end, some specifics that I found going through this, challenge to raise money for something on my own. This presentation has a lot of information about how I approach fundraising now and how I've come to think about fundraising, both through my experience in just kind of getting more sophisticated at how I approach it, but also working with larger organizations and teams that are able to do this efficiently and sort of on a larger scale. So this information is not reflective on how I piece things together in the beginning. So I want to kind of share both of those sides of it. So you can kind of think through where you are in this journey and what's helpful for you. So in terms of getting started, I think it's helpful to address the facts of life that fundraising means you have to ask people for money, right? None of us really like doing this, but this is how we are able to exist as nonprofit organizations. Some of these people you're going to ask for money are for your friends and your family. Sometimes I use the threshold of, if I'm not willing to ask my mom to give me money for this, do I really believe in this project? And ultimately, you are responsible for raising all of the money. There's sort of an ideal world in which we can focus on just the programs or just the pieces that we're good at, and that someone else will do the fundraising. But I think in, thinking about the realities of your situations running small organizations, this is, really ultimately becomes your responsibility. So I think it's helpful. So let's all, I know everyone's on mute, but let's go back and say these things, out loud wherever you are. I have to ask people for money. Even my friends and my family. And I am responsible for raising all the money. Okay, great. Ultimately, you can do anything you want in your organizations as long as you can raise the money to support it. So it's sort of as simple as that. There's no real rocket science to fundraising. There is a little bit of art and creativity and strategy, but ultimately, we're asking people for money, money that they made doing something else. And we're asking them to give it to us so that we can have an impact in the community and have affect a change or a benefit that donors and us in management share. Okay, so how do we do that? If you've been to the first couple of these webinars, I always try to relate everything back to the ultimate strategy of what we're trying to achieve as an organization. So the mission of the organization, the distilled version of how we think about the organization, if you remember back even to that little kind of mission matrix thing, that will drive how we talk about ourselves when we are doing fundraising. And then as we've gone through the budgeting exercise, we'll learn really even how much money we need to raise. It's surprising sometimes if you actually go through and write down all the things that you want to do and look at your budget and split that up over a year. You may find that it's not so intimidating of a task. So that's why everything stems from this core of what you're trying to do and how much it's going to cost. So yeah, this is the mission part. What are you raising money for? How much is it going to cost? And how much time does that pay for? We're also existing in time in these sort of fundraising strategies. It's not all the money has to come in tomorrow, otherwise we'll go bankrupt. There's a little bit of a almost an uncomfortable level of churn in nonprofits and in any sort of business where you are constantly just trying to stay a few months ahead of running out of money. So again, we're not raising all the money at once. We're raising the money over time. That's helpful to think through kind of, this is in leadership, this is called black box mentality, like taking the uncomfortable thing and like starting to look at it and unpack it and make it so that we can actually wrap our heads around it and plan a strategy for it. And a lot of this in fundraising is driven by how much money we actually need. So for an example, if you need $25,000 for the year, that could mean you find one rich person who gives you $25,000 and then you're done. It's easy. Or 25 donors giving $1,000, and that's roughly 2 donations a month. Even through that, you can start to unpack, how would I get 2 people to give $1,000 a month? It doesn't feel as complicated as trying to raise $25,000 all at once. Might even feel better thinking about it as 50 donors giving $500 a month, and that's roughly 4. Maybe more people or have better connections at this $500 level of giving. Ultimately, it's going to look something like this. You'll have, a smaller amount of donors giving larger amounts of money, kind of down to larger amount of donors giving smaller dollar values. And that's where we come up with this idea called the donor pyramid. So donor pyramid is I guess it's really a donor triangle. Maybe I could rebrand that. But your donations in your organization are going to come from a variety of sources. Some of them are going to be big. Most of the people interacting and giving to your organization are going to be at this base of the pyramid. So there's more people to interact with, more relationships to maintain at this sort of base level of giving up to the top, where you only need a few folks at this sort of top level to be contributing, to be part of this whole tapestry. And ultimately, we'll talk about this in individual donation section later. But the people who are your smaller dollar donors are the ones who you want to kind of move up this pyramid over time, so that somebody who gives $10 once is someone who you're going to ask for $50 next time, and the time after that you're going to ask them for $100, and that's how we keep this sort of mix of donors and realizing that it takes a variety of people at a variety of different levels to make this work in our organizations. Defining targets will help you think about who are the humans and the organizations that can fill those needs, right? So if in your pyramid you've got one person that is $10,000, then maybe that's a business or an organization. And if you have 50 people that need to give at $200, you can start to think about who are the people in your network, or the people that have given before, or people that you think might be able to give at that level, and sort of fill in your kind of overall fundraising strategy. Second reality check. Fundraising is sales. And actually, most of this presentation is going to be about sales. Sales is another sort of uncomfortable fact of life in nonprofit organizations that I think it's helpful to just sort of admit that this is the world that we live in. And if it's something you're not good at, coming off the bat, it's something you have to work on. It's something everyone, I feel like there's only a few people that are really into sales. But it's something we can get better at. It's something we can put strategy to. It's something we can unpack and make not so hard to think about. Sales at its core is intentional strategy designed to make people act in a certain way. So in the case of fundraising, we are executing a strategy to get individuals or organizations or philanthropic groups to give us money. Fundraising is about money. It's about sales. Sales is awful and everyone hates it. This is another truth, I think, generally. But again, it's something that we can unpack, we can think about, and we can sort of wrap some strategy around this so it's not so complicated. I think one thing that's great about coming from a nonprofit position is all of you who are running these organizations or part of leadership believe in the work that they're doing. And I'm sure that you could give me a pitch about the great things that you've accomplished or your goals and how you're going to change the parts of the community that you're focused on. So if you can pitch that value, then that means you can sell it. It's mostly just adding an ask of a dollar figure at the end of your sort of explanation of why this is important and why this matters. To be intentional about this, we use a different sort of triangle concept called the sales funnel. So this is the idea of, I think it's the next one. Yeah. So your sales funnel looks like this. You've got prospects at the top. You've got more potential donors in your network or sort of on your radar. Then you have actual donors. And your job is to take the people at the top and move them sort of incrementally down so that, they start off as a prospect, they go through a period of time or a period of relationships or a period of intentional actions. Again, sales is an intentional effort to move people through this funnel. And there are some things you can set, and this is the thing you can Google, and there's a lot of different stages of the funnel. Basically, you've got people who you haven't interacted with yet that then you kind of reach out, have first contact. Then after you have first contact, then you sort of set, maybe you set the meeting. Maybe after that meeting, you submit a proposal. And every step along this funnel, you're sort of going from more options to fewer options. But this is another thing that in thinking about this funnel mentality, I think it's more of a kind of like we talked about in budgeting. It's more of a lifestyle thing. The idea that you are trying to get individuals and organizations to incrementally move their stages, so that you're taking people from prospects, all the way down to donors. It helps for me, certainly it helps me think about, what do I do next with somebody, or how do I, reach out? The first time you call someone, they're not going to just give you money. But your goal isn't to make them give you money the first time. The goal is to get them somewhere in this funnel. And then your goal is then to just move them to the next step. So it's not, how do we get from here to here? It's how do we get through these steps to ultimately being someone that contributes to the organization. So who are my prospects? Your best prospects are people already in your own network, people who want to be involved in the organization, people who are potentially willing to give to support the organization, are going to opt in to the work you're doing in some way. So there may be people who like your organization on social media. Maybe they're people that you've talked to about this or past partners you've worked with. Those are folks who become really good prospects for starting to move through the funnel, because you already know that at some level they like what you're doing, and are willing to take some action to support it. You've also got, friends, families, your mom, your uncle, depending on how much money you need and how much money they have as capacity to give, will kind of define where they go in that donor pyramid. But your best prospects are people you already know. So that's a reason why you should keep really good track of who is engaging in the organization? Who, if you've hosted events, who are the people that have come to events? Who are people that, is there a group of people that seem to like your Facebook posts a lot? The people who are your best prospects are going to kind of show themselves through engagement with the organization. And that's why we set up these sort of methods to track people, to see what they're doing, to see how they're engaging, and then why we have the funnel set up the way it is, so that there's a place for them to start on that funnel, and then our job is to just kind of move them forward over time. In terms of prospects that are not in your network, one of the nice things about nonprofits is that we do like to celebrate the people who are giving to our organizations. My favorite thing, when I was trying to figure out who would give money to my little arts organization while I was sitting in a museum, and then I realized they put the names of the people on the wall sometimes. Like we're always saying thank you and always giving recognition. It's one of the best ways we can provide value back to our supporters. So finding similar organizations where you are in community. Fundraising is also a very localized, thing to work with. But if you are, let's say you're doing an animal shelter, who's funding the ASPCA in your town, or who is funding other sort of animal outreach programs, and they'll say that on the website. They'll say that sometimes in their materials. If you go to events, sometimes they'll be on flyers. So as you start to sort of be aware and be thinking about this, you'll start to notice that it's pretty easy to figure out who are the people in your town that are supporting work like the work you're doing. Another good way to generate prospects is the board. And we're going to talk next week for a whole hour about working with the board and making sure we're getting value out of their participation. The board is great for generating leads. So the board knows people, hopefully some people with the capacity to give that you might not know. So generating leads, making introductions. And we'll reinforce this next week, but your board should also be financially contributing to the organization as well, even if it's at a small dollar level. The idea of a sort of required board gift, I think, is really important, if nothing else, to set the tone and the formality that while we want to save the whales, we have to raise actual dollars to do that. So it's the reality of the world, and I think embracing it, even on a small scale, helps keep everyone on the same page. But in terms of prospects for you to think about in donating, the board's a great source for generating leads. And you can even task them with, every month I need 5 new names and 5 email introductions for people that I can talk to who may become potential donors. Some other thoughts on sales. Sales is a very customer-centric pursuit. So anytime you're looking at selling your organization or selling what you're doing, there's a phrasing and a positioning where you're pitching something that's about the value that your customer is going to get. So the value that the donors are going to get. They're going to get their name in a flyer, some like standard things you can do, but also they're going to get the feeling of community and the feeling of impacting, part of the world that needs changing. But any of your pitches should really be focused on what can you do? What are you providing of value to the people you want to give you money? And this is a little bit earlier, we're talking about, your pitch is basically your passion statement about why what you're doing is great, why you personally are the person to do this, and adding to that an ask for money. That is what makes it a pitch. So just some questions. I think there's a lot of questions in this presentation. I was in maybe a interrogative mood earlier, but they're all things to think about, and they're all very specific to you and your organization and your city and your resources. So there's no easy prescriptive answer across these different organization types and different and different ways of existing. So So sometimes it's helpful just to think about questions. I like this approach to thinking about pitches. When I'm asking, why is what we're doing as an organization important? Why is my presence as the executive director of this group, why does that matter in this? And then, why does it matter for them to do this work? Again, being customer centric. And then, why is now the time to act? Might be a helpful approach in thinking about your pitch. And always thinking, what is the motivation of the donor to donate? People, at different parts of the donor pyramid, at different stages of life, at different, interests, all are giving money for some reason. And our job as fundraisers is to really understand the reasons that our donors and our supporters are contributing to the organization, so we can make sure we're providing value back to them for their gift. And then we can keep them as part of the family so that they'll keep giving year after year. Donors like to give to something specific. Events are great. Fundraising campaigns are great. If you're raising money for a new facility, things that are sort of tangible tend to do really well with sort of rallying donors around. Donors generally don't like to give to the electric bill or, the CPA consultant fees, the sort of admin pieces like we've talked about in the second workshop. So keeping that in mind, that it's easier to approach donors from the programmatic angle than it is to ask them to fund just kind of ongoing operations. Insurance, no one wants to pay for insurance. It's not fun. They also like to give to something that looks like a real thing. For those of us who are on the earlier organizational life cycle, we've talked about this, and we'll keep kind of reinforcing this, especially as we get into the branding workshops in a couple of weeks. If you're a new nonprofit, you need to make it look like you're, are going to be able to execute on their gift properly, that you're going to be around year after year so that the work will continue. So there's some strategies around making sure that you look like a real thing. Donors are giving for a reason. They are looking for something in return. So understanding what their reasons are helps us understand how we can position the ask and how we can position what we're providing them in return. And they'd like to be recognized. This is kind of a through line. I think there's some rare exceptions where people don't want to be recognized, but that's part of the motivation of donors. Even if it's not recognized individually, recognizing them as part of your organizational family that's making this work possible. And we'll talk about this, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past webinars, but data is what really helps you here in keeping track of, the person who came to your event last year is someone who you want to invite to the event this year, and making sure that your information systems, and we'll talk about this in more specifics when we talk about technology. There are a ton of donor management platforms that will help you. A lot of it is just the intentionality of keeping track. You could do that on, like old-timey lawyer guys and Rolodexes. Like, you can keep track of it on Post-it notes. The system is only going to be effective if your strategy and your use of the data is solid. But again, your prospects will show themselves to you if you keep track of everything. One of the benefits of being small, there are some definite drawbacks, as we'll talk about, especially with grants. But a benefit of being small is that you can offer way more return per dollar than larger organizations, right? So a $5,000 gift to you, if your budget is $50,000 a year, is like a huge deal. And so you can do a lot more in terms of recognition and celebration and thank yous for that $5,000 than they'll get at, $5,000 to deny away is just a drop in the bucket and probably doesn't even keep the lights on for a week. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's a way that you can really leverage, creative ways to say thank you, creative ways to engage donors in the work of the organization. Those things go a long way, and are one of the unique things we can do as small organizations, that we can spend more time with, our $5,000 donors or $1,000 donors than a larger organization can. So it's something to keep in mind. So something to think about. How can we be creative about providing value back to our donors? So that's the end of the sort of stage setting section. Does anyone have any questions? I see George has got one. Yeah, I think it's, in terms of thinking about what you're selling, it's, you're ultimately selling your ability to impact the population or the part of the community that you're working on as a nonprofit. But there's also things, you're also selling the ability for a donor to be engaged in, events. Sometimes, people like this kind of gala circuit thing. You're engaging them in the ability to have a direct connection with the impact that you're having as an organization. So this goes back to a little bit in that first webinar we talked about. It's challenging because we've sort of got two customer bases. We've got our customers who are benefiting from our nonprofit work, and then we've got our customers who are funding it. Each have different needs and different interests. So the pitch and what we're selling needs to understand, what value are they looking for, and how can we be the ones that kind of fill that value, if that makes sense. We can talk more about that at the end. Some of the revenue sources we're going to talk about specifically are individual giving, corporate giving, and grants. I put grants at the end. I feel like grants are an easy thing to think about as a solution. They're actually much harder to execute when you're just getting started. The easiest things for you are going to be individual giving and corporate giving. So we're going to talk about those first, just to make sure we have enough time as we're going through this. I think I put too many slides in this presentation too, so I might start talking faster. Individual giving is 100% about relationship building. There's a few different types. There are many more ways you can think about this. I'm going to talk about just a few versions of individual giving. Major gifts are, when we're talking about the $5,000, the $10,000, donors that need a little bit more hand-holding to get there. Campaign giving, these are your attempt to get, $500, $100 from a larger group of people. Crowdfunding can be a really successful strategy, both because it helps you connect with folks that are already kind of in your network and give them an opportunity to give. It also creates an opportunity to talk about what the organization is doing and celebrate the things that you've accomplished so far. And then events are kind of individual contributions, because you're getting smaller dollar amounts from larger people, either through ticket sales or if they're buying food at the event, or buying things to the bar. Major gifts, this is the top of your pyramid, right? So these are you're not looking for a lot of these. So in thinking about kind of your overall fundraising strategy, identifying maybe a couple of these as targets. You're not going to be able to fund your whole organization just focusing on people who can write a $10,000 check, and especially depending on what city and what community you're in, that level of what defines a major gift fluctuates. It might be $10,000 in New York City. It might be less in sort of more rural parts of the country. But this is the top of the pyramid. Fundraisers that I've worked with before have this idea of, and the number changes. Everyone has their own kind of different number. But the idea of, you've got to interact with someone a number of times before you can actually make an ask, especially at this major gift level. The last person I talked to about this, their rule is 9. They've got to hear from you 9 times before they are in a position that you can ask them for money. This is mostly specific to major gifts. So these are, kind of rich people in the community. It's not something you can, call and ask on the first meeting for money. The strategy needs to be building this relationship over time, kind of moving them through that sales funnel like we talked about. And I think the number 9 is helpful because it's kind of a big number. That's a lot. But a touch can be an email, a phone call, a coffee meeting, but some sort of hearing from your organization in advance of the ask as you're kind of moving them down the pyramid. I think it's helpful to see that that's, it takes a lot of time. So the best strategy with major donors, going slow, moving through the funnel. First contact can be, hey, I see that you're supporting the ASPCA. I've got a nonprofit that does other animal work. I'd love to talk to you about it. That kind of thing. It's a slow burn. It takes a while, but it's all about relationships. And it's important to remember that rich people are people too. They're just rich. So the approach to the human beings behind major gifts is a similar approach to the human beings who are giving less money. You need to build a relationship. You need to build a rapport. You need to build trust with them. You need to show them that you're capable of making an impact with their gift, and providing value in return for them, whatever that may be based on their own motivations. And that's something you'll learn over getting to know them. So I guess the main point of major gifts is you're not going to call someone, cold call, and get $5,000 from a person, right off the bat. But this idea that, taking it slow, going through the funnel, is the best approach to that. Campaign giving is where you're soliciting smaller dollars from more people. So end of the year appeals, if you've got a fall fundraising goal, things like that. Those are where you're really going to rely on mining your contacts, mining people who have already opted in, like we talked about, the people who are, engaging with you on social media or coming to free events, then become prospects for asking for $50 or $100 or $20. And the strategies for this, people do social media campaigns. Facebook now, you can do just embedded fundraising campaigns within Facebook. Email, I think, is sort of the newish standard of executing something like that. So something that goes out to all of your network saying, hey, we've got a fundraising goal of $5,000. Help us get there. People still do like getting things in the mail. I personally don't, but fundraisers that I know that keep some of these old school tools in place can be valuable. I don't even really collect mailing addresses for people anymore, but I think that it is a way that people give. You want to give people, especially in a campaign situation, you want to give people a variety of ways to give, whether they're comfortable doing a text to give campaign, or they're comfortable giving on Facebook, or comfortable, entering into a plugin on your website, or if they want to write a check and mail it. You want to meet people where they are and give them a variety of ways to engage in giving to the organization. Since we're talking about smaller dollars, we don't need as much hand-holding. There are not as many touches needed to get someone to give $50, $20, but it's still a funnel. And that idea of someone who comes to an event, someone who opens your emails regularly, those are the people that become prospects for their first gift. And then keeping in the funnel mentality, the people that are giving $50, $100 regularly become our targets for asking for $500 or $1,000 next time. It's all, incremental movements down the funnel, moving from engaged to donor to larger donor, in a sort of a strategy and intentional way. Follow-up is really important in any of these. I think I have a whole slide that says that, but the beginning of a relationship with somebody, if they're a new donor, they want to hear from you a lot. I think once a week is sometimes the metric. I kind of feel like that is maybe too much, but they They want to feel like they're part of the work you're doing. I think donor motivation a lot of times at this level is because they want to be part of the work that you're doing. There is something romantic about, going off and starting a nonprofit or running an organization that our job is to change the world and make something better. I think a lot of people don't get that in their normal jobs. So there's, these donors at this level, I think, are looking for a sense of community, a sense of involvement, a sense of connection to the mission that you're working on. Crowdfunding is the same principles. It's still, I think it's still kind of a campaign giving because we're asking more people for smaller dollar amounts. There are lots of nice, cute platforms. We used to just have Kickstarter, which is great. There's a lot now that you can do with crowdfunding. Ultimately, crowdfunding is still your own connections. There are not a lot of people on Kickstarter clicking on random projects looking where they can give $5 or $10. So it's, again, a strategy, a way to engage people who are already opting in to be engaged with the organization, but it does create, a unique opportunity and a unique option for them to give. It's another chance where creativity can go a long way. T-shirts and rewards and things like that can be, more creative and can be, ideally creative without having to cost a lot of money. So then you can keep more of the money that you're raising. But it's still ultimately is just an extension of the same campaign idea of engaging people who are already opting into and be engaged with the organization, getting them into the funnel at some level, and then starting to, nurture that relationship and move people forward. Events are kind of individual giving, again, because it's, if you're selling tickets, that's kind of like, getting $25 or $20 from a bunch of different people. Events are great because it gives the public an opportunity to see the work of your organization in person and meet the people who are involved in it, feel a real touch point with the impact that's happening. So I like events. I think especially when you're on the younger side, a lot of organizations that are getting started tend to be very event focused. You might not have an office yet or programs that last, throughout the workday. So events are really your way to connect with your audience and to celebrate and kind of showcase the work that you're doing. There's some strategies. I used to, when I was working in Tampa, in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, there were zoning regulations where I could pull a temporary liquor permit as a nonprofit organization, and then I could keep all of the bar sales from that. I think my first 10 grand I raised for one of these nonprofits was just based on selling alcohol at an event. So there's a lot of strategies in this and ways that you can sort of make this an extension of the work that you're doing. But, especially in certain communities that don't have a more developed culture of philanthropy, people will pay for events. People will pay to, $100 to go out to dinner easier than they're going to pay $100 to contribute to a nonprofit. So events are a way that you can kind of create a hybrid of that, where they're still out, social, engaging in person with other people, but also using that as the way to sort of celebrate and sell the work that you're doing. The nice part about any of these things is you create a opportunity to really talk about the work that you're doing, right? So like an ongoing campaign where people can always give money online, or they can always give money through like an Amazon Smile thing. You can't really do press releases or marketing or social media posts around something like that, but you can around campaigns or around crowdfunding or around an event. They have a really clear CTA, and CTA is the call to action. So this is like we were looking at the pitch, the passion plus the ask. The ask in that case is the CTA. With an event, our call to action is come to the event. With the campaign, the call to action is donate during this defined time period for this defined thing we're working on. And those points give you, kind of little rallying opportunities for your audience. and reasons for you to really spread the communication, to your mailing list and on social media. That's one of the great parts about organizing the ability to give individually into kind of a, either a campaign or something like that. It gives you a way to really talk about your work, and provides an opportunity for, someone who might appreciate your work, not only to just say, "Oh, that's great, I'm happy you're doing that," but to really, act and give money. And then I kind of alluded to some of this, but just like the funnel, your goal with any of these is moving people through your funnel, through your pipeline, starting with someone who's opting in to be engaged, someone who comes to an event, becomes a $50, becomes a $500. So those are how you generate prospects for larger dollar amounts, is people who are engaged at different levels, lower levels of the funnel. I think that's really important. Okay, I think that's, and then getting good at follow-up. The day you cash the first $20 check from someone really begins the cycle of getting them to give $100 next time. So the continuity and the follow-up is not as fun to do, but is really important, and is really how you sustain that pipeline and that ability to have a funnel and build that donor pyramid, because it doesn't end with that first donation. The first donation is only the beginning, to getting the next one. And along this lines of rich people are people too, donors are people too. So thinking about, in your own experience, what's worked for you. We'll talk about some in the strategy session. We'll talk a lot about it in branding. Folks who are doing this well, other organizations, let's say, sometimes have really good ideas that we can rip off. So, did the postcard that you got sent, did that work for you? Because the people you're asking for money are people too. So you can use your own experience and the experience of people in your network to kind of help you figure out what's the best way to make these asks and to create a campaign around getting people to give. Okay, any questions about individual giving? People get whole college degrees in this stuff, so we're really kind of flying through, really quick. So it's a lot of information. Again, this presentation will be available online, and we'll continue the conversation through some other, forum vehicles we'll talk about. Corporate giving is another great option as you're getting started. Corporations have much more flexibility in the timing and amount of giving than grants or things you apply for. Sometimes the funds that businesses have available are kind of like grants, and so we kind of lump them into the grants part of this, and we'll talk about in a little bit. If there's an application process like, Bank of America or something like that will have an application, then it becomes more of a grant strategy than a corporate giving strategy. There's a new trend to call these people have job titles that are corporate social responsibility. CSR is the acronym, and it can make you sound cool and like, you're hip to what people are doing now. If they have too many sort of processes on it, then it's more of a grant strategy than a corporate giving strategy. Corporate giving outside of a defined like philanthropic wing, or a CSR wing or something like that, or a grant application, businesses are doing this for marketing, right? They want to connect with your audience in a way that makes their business look better. So in thinking about approaching businesses, and I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on corporate giving, but in terms of thinking about donor motivation in businesses, this is what it is. They want to sell their product or their service. They want their brand to be aligned with your brand, because as a nonprofit, we're sort of in the business of generating goodwill and in creating, impact and a positive difference in our community. Businesses sell shoes and pool toys and things like that don't have that same sort of heartstrings approach. So the motivation for businesses supporting us is that they want to be aligned with the mission that we have, and be seen in a favorable light by the audience that can generate. So things that we want to give them. Event sponsorship is probably the easiest one of this sort of corporate giving. Naming rights. Again, you can offer a lot for a little bit of money. I once named a whole gallery for 6 months after someone for $5,000. I don't think there's anywhere else you can do that. Ads on the website. Again, they want to connect with your audience and they want to be seen in the same sort of favorable brand view that you're able to generate as a nonprofit. So that also affects, who you would be reaching out to if there's a local business that you want to support you. It's really the marketing people you want to talk to, because those are the people that have more flexibility in what they can spend money on, because they're buying ads and they're, doing other things to promote the business. So they've got a good amount of flexibility in how they spend it. And this is the best value proposition you can offer a business is, this sort of marketing impact. I do have a sponsorship package. If you want to look at that, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to keep going, but I can send that around or we can look at it right at the end. There are other samples you can find. I think it's, just like we're sort of snooping to find out who's donating to other organizations, you can also pretend to be a potential sponsor, and see what materials are being handed out in your community. And if they look good and if they work, they're, ripping them off is always a great idea. Not directly, but using the formatting and some of the kind of language about it. But I'll send it around after this. Okay. Lindsay, I'm going to hold your questions because I want to go through grants and then we'll talk about that at the end. So grants seem like an easy solution. They seem like, I just fill out a form, I send it away, I don't have to talk to a human. And if, I did it well, then somebody gives me a check. It's actually really hard to do grants when you're new. And this, Lindsay, to your question a little bit, the challenge of track record is part of this. When you're a new organization, you don't have these sort of ready-made grant blurbs. Organizations who've been around for a while and have applied for a lot of grants have had the time to really test what's the most effective way to explain what we're doing and what our goal and our vision is. For a lot of you, this will be the first time you have to write these things if you're doing a grant application. Tracking deadlines is a huge part of this, and knowing what grants are due when. It's hard when you've got a lot of other stuff to do. You don't have a good track record to show as much of how you're impacting the community. In our first session, we talked about that's why it's important to really document everything, because you can sort of ad hoc a track record if you got enough pictures of the impact or the crowds of people at events that you have. You can sort of make it seem like you've been around longer than you have, but it's challenging when you're first starting out. Grant language, and I don't know how it got this way, but grant language has evolved into a very specific sort of nothing kind of tone, which is hard to grasp when you're new to it. And people do this for a living, and larger organizations have staff members that only write grants all day long. So there's a lot of competition from people who have more time and have more experience doing this. So not that you can't be successful with grants, but in thinking about your overall fundraising strategy, I think these should be a little bit more long shot things for you. They can really, in your life cycle, grants coming in can really boost you up to like the next level of programming that you want to do. But because of all these things, I don't think it should be something that you rely on. And there's a reason why it feels kind of like magic. It's because it doesn't work exactly like that. But there are some strategies that we'll talk about for grants if you're choosing to write them. I think half the battle is identifying what the grants are that you can apply for and figuring out when they're due and managing your calendar to, understand that, if there's a grant deadline on Friday, it's going to take you 37 hours to write that grant. So you need to start, whenever that was last week, managing deadlines and actually finding grants, I think, is half the battle. Research goes a long way here. Some big points is one of this is probably the biggest point here, but homework on other organization funders. It's similar to sitting down in the museum and reading the names off the wall. If there are corporations or foundations that are funding that type of work, then there's a chance that they have a grant application that you would be a good fit for too. Some of us might be in areas where we have grant making associations. We have a funders collective in San Diego that their membership database is a good thing to look at for who are the people making grants in this community. There's a big online database called Foundation Source, and this is what people who are like professional grant writers are using. And I think it is like $500 a month or something like that. It's an insanely expensive product, but it is a very thorough, searchable online database that you can use. $500 a month is, I'm sure, past everyone's budget for something like this, but it is something that I remember at my undergrad, they had paid for a subscription for students to be able to use for free, and sometimes even local libraries will have it. So I would check with libraries, and if you've got connections with the universities, see if they have some sort of searchable grant database, because that'll save you a lot of money, and they have gone through a lot of work to aggregate these available grants. And sometimes you can find this access to it for free. So that's an important point. It should probably have its own slide next time. Another thing that's really important in grants is applying for things that are a good fit, right? So understanding the motivations of the organization funding it, really reading the requirements and the what they're looking for in applications will save you a lot of time. You're obviously going to be most successful applying for grants that want to fund things like you than you are for kind of broadly interpreting what you think they're looking for. Sometimes I call this raising, shifting off of your normal mission to make yourself look good for a grant. Ends up not really raising money because you're raising expenses for something that you don't really do, right? So if you are trying to make yourself look like you're suitable for a after school program grant and you get it, then now you have to start an after school program. You're not really raising money to support your work. You're raising money to support new things. So I call that raising expenses versus raising money. Sometimes organizations will provide samples of past applications that are successful. This is a really great idea if you found a grant that is applicable to you and need help with, how do you phrase something in this sort of language that makes grant reviewers happy. Reading successful applications will help you understand, what do, these reviewers of the applications, what are they looking for? This is really trivial, but is, I think, the most important thing ever with grants. This is like, for me, it flashes back to, fifth grade writing tests where, you write a paragraph and kind of in the first sentence of your answer, you kind of rephrase the question. It seems stupid, but a lot of grant applications don't actually answer the questions that are in the application. So really make sure that, a lot of the grant stuff and why it's so tricky and time consuming is, making sure that you're actually addressing the questions, making sure that, you provide the 4 copies stapled in the upper left-hand corner and 1 copy bound with clear back and signed. They all have these like crazy specific restrictions. And because there is a lot of competition, they'll throw it out if it's not stapled right, or they'll throw it out if it doesn't include a CD. If you give a flash drive and they wanted that on a floppy disk or something, following the rules and answering the questions is sometimes the hardest part in sort of the learning curve of how to write grants. The Grant Speak Challenge, I can send you some examples of grants. I don't have any teed up right now, but I'm hoping you sort of know what I'm talking about. It's this kind of amorphous way of speaking that's sort of designed to feel open to interpretation to some degree by the person reviewing the grant, so that it can seem like you're answering whatever they're looking for, which is really dumb. That's my least favorite part about grants. Anyways, sometimes grants are marked as reimbursable. This is something to consider in terms of managing your own finances. If you've got a $10,000 grant that is reimbursable, that means you have to spend $10,000 before they'll give it back to you. So sometimes there can be cash flow challenges in executing these. So just something to keep in mind. Reimbursement grants are really common because then they can really make sure that they're paying for things that they intended to. Grant consultants are another thing that seems really attractive because it's all down this line of there's a magic way that somebody else is going to do this for me, and that's why we did that affirmation in the beginning, that this is ultimately things that you've got to figure out and that you've got to do. Grant consultants will most of the time just charge you a lot of money to build a calendar of when grants are due. That's almost always the first step that they propose. So I don't think it's. I mean, every situation is different, and I'm happy to kind of chat with you about your specific ones. There's a lot of consultants who are not good at this that can sound good, so just be careful if you're going this route. Ultimately, just like everything else, grants are reviewed by human beings, and those human beings are people too. So the relationship building approach that we talked about in individual giving kind of applies to grants too. You're going to be more successful in writing a grant if you know one of the people who's on the review panel. That's just the way kind of this world works. So keeping that in mind, making it as easy for people who are reviewing your application to get the information they need, because ultimately, they are people who have lots of demands on their time, just like everyone else. So at the end of the day, your challenge in fundraising is how do all these pieces come together to fund the organization? Some of it's going to be major gifts. Some of it's going to be small individual gifts. Some might be events. Some might be grants. It's sort of this kind of network of different revenue options that, in developing your strategy, your challenge is to, how do all these things work together to get me the revenue I need to have the impact that I want in the community I'm working in. So last thing, I know we're over time for a little bit, but I wanted to share, the first time I did a nonprofit organization, I didn't know any of this. I didn't even really know that there was a sort of, they call it the nonprofit sector. I wasn't even aware that was a thing. I started my first nonprofit. It was a sort of arts production organization. We had a film festival and a music festival. I couldn't really wrap my head around anything other than events for a while. I could see how I could host an event. I could see the revenue that came in from that. I could sort of understand how to do, people would come back to events. I could sell tickets. I never did any of this sort of intentional approach to giving to move people over the pipeline. This is how I work now, but just to kind of give you a perspective of, there is still a lot of ad hocing it when you're kind of figuring it out in the beginning. I had a membership campaign for a while, again, because I couldn't really wrap my head around. I thought I didn't know any rich people, so I didn't know how to get money from rich people. But the things sort of evolve, and then as you become better at this, you start to, require new opportunities and new thoughts about it as the organizations grow. But there's a lot of intentional sort of strategy approach that I advocate for and recommend now in the work that I'm doing. But I was able to build a successful organization not really doing any of it in the beginning. Successful to the point of where I didn't get paid to do any work for 2 years. I didn't have enough money in it to be sustainable, so that when I moved to a new city, it could keep going without me. So you can get by without really having this sophisticated approach to it, but you're not going to be able to do it for very long. So that's why I wanted to share my personal experience of being able to make something work without having to do this, but also acknowledging that I wouldn't do it that way again, knowing what I know now, um, and seeing how effective these intentional strategy pieces can be at making a stronger organization. So, two sides of the same coin, but I wanted to share that with you. More of this. I have these things at the end of every one. Ways we can help with Tiny Opera House. We do these webinars. Now I just put the slide in to make sure people are paying attention at the end. Templates and blogs. There's not a lot of templates. I'll send out some samples of the sponsorship package. It's not as much of a template. When we talk about branding, whatever week that is, we will get into proposal writing and ways that you can get really fancy looking templates for not very much money. I have created, we talked about this last time, the idea of a kind of a closed Facebook group that would provide an opportunity for those of you who want to kind of ask questions of the community. I'm going to invite people that I've worked with who are kind of experts in different subject areas. I'm putting the link to that in the chat window. I think this can be a great way to continue the conversation. If you've got specific questions that you want to ask of the group, can be helpful there. We've got a lot of this donor tracking stuff built into the Tiny Opera House platform, and again, it's it's really cheap to work with. It's really easy. Some of the folks who are on these webinars are already using it, which I think is really great. But it's got this tracking, donor tracking stuff built into it. And also, when you're submitting financials, you can submit financials that are in kind of best practices and best case, because, we're organizing your information that way so you can be successful. Okay, let's do questions quick. I think, Lindsay, you've got a couple of them. I do think that, a track record is really important. I think there's a mix between, having a real robust track record and being good at, marketing and celebrating a shorter track record. Some of it is you kind of have to do something first before you can convince other people that you're capable of doing it. And that is kind of a catch-22. We have a whole week on program design. So we'll talk some more about, how do you do an effective program if you haven't done it before, and how do you make it so that it's able to be replicated and be successful kind of, in the future. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of yes, and it is kind of a catch-22. Until you've got some programmatic credibility, it's hard to get people excited about the work you're doing. But things like events, those are kind of softer ways of talking about your work. They're kind of like little examples of the work that you do versus a full-on program history. And crowdfunding and things like that, it's possible to get people excited about something preemptively, that we're raising money to do something. If you've got already a good personal network, you can leverage that to get some funding for programs in advance of doing them. In terms of, if a sponsor, if you've got a corporate sponsor that ends up down the road to have a bad reputation, I don't know if there's anything really you can do about that. I guess depending on how bad it, would warrant, if there's additional communication that you need to do to your audience or to the public. You can take them off the website and take their names down from things. But yeah, that's a tricky one. That would be a good one. We can brainstorm together if you want to set up an office hours thing. Auditing. There are a lot of organizations. I wouldn't say a lot. I think there are fewer organizations that actually require an audit than it seems to be. Financial audits, and it's different in different states. In California, there's a revenue threshold of $2 million of revenue before you need to do an audit. I generally do not recommend audits unless you are legally required to do them. Because I don't think they provide a lot of value for small organizations. I also think that that unless you have really specific instances, like this is a pot of money that we can get if we have an audit, like unless there's a direct, correlation between those two things, I wouldn't, I think having an audit is a waste of time and a waste of money. But if there's something that you can get, I think there is a lot of feeling like if we had an audit, we would be able to apply for more grants. That's not really that true in my experience. So something to consider. If you've got a specific situation, then that's different. I think unless you have a really compelling reason to do an audit, I wouldn't do one. I don't think it's worth the money. Let's see. Here's a question. We're talking about creating a for-profit company to generate funds for a nonprofit. Should we do this as a subsidiary? I think this is tricky. There's a sort of legal concept, and I'm probably not equipped to give real legal advice. I'd be happy to put you in touch with some folks that I've worked with who are great at taking meetings and paying for some advice. I think you can run into problems. There's an idea of the corporate veil in legal work where, if you're a nonprofit and you have a for-profit that's really acting like a nonprofit, then they all kind of become a nonprofit, and then you can violate the rules by accident and get into trouble. It's hard. It's a hard structural thing to have a for-profit and a nonprofit going at the same time with a similar mission. So I would recommend talking to somebody about that who you can pay. I mean, like the best thing I think that you get from paying lawyers, because you can Google this and weblawyer.org.com. I don't know if that's a real thing, but you can find a solution or find an answer to this. What you get when you pay a lawyer is you get their, I don't know, a delicate way to say, you get their insurance, right? So lawyers have to maintain these big malpractice policies. If you are a paying client, then you are relying on their information to do things. If it ends up going wrong or you end up getting in trouble with it, then you kind of have someone to sue at the end of it. And it's not a really great reason, but I think that's why something like that would be worth paying for an hour of time to get sort of an official opinion on, and some help with that. But that can be tricky if both organizations look like they're doing the same thing. It's a tricky structural thing to pull off. And, who can be on the, board of the nonprofit versus who can be an executive of the for-profit, and how are they related, or how do you prove that they're not related because they're supposed to be independent if they're, is an actual independent company. I'd talk to someone smarter than me with better insurance than me too. Any other questions about this, or anything else that this has sort of sparked for you? Next week, we're going to talk about, we're going to have a whole hour on board management. Boards are tricky for every single size of organization. My first organization, I had my mom and my sister on the board just because it was easy to file the paperwork, but then I got no value out of them, Not that I don't love them. They're not great board members. But, what is the board supposed to do? How can they help you be more effective at your job, and fulfill their sort of fiduciary responsibilities as well? Okay. Any other questions about this or anything else that you want to talk about? Okay. Well, thank you all for sharing some of your time with me and with each other on Friday. And hopefully this was helpful. Again, I'll send this presentation around probably this afternoon. And if you know someone who missed it, we'll do I'll put the video up on YouTube sometime today too. And then here's my contact information if you need it. Thanks, everyone.